G'day everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Practical Powerlifting. This is episode 4. Before we get into the episode, I need to say a big thanks to all of you listeners for the positive response that I've had to the launch of Practical Powerlifting. We launched 3 episodes last week, and there've been a number of downloads, a number of positive comments and feedback, so I've really appreciated it. And I'm looking forward to releasing more episodes and improving my skills and improving the product that I'm able to deliver. Today's episode, I speak to Victor Liu. Victor is a coach out of Melbourne, and much like some of our previous guests, has basically been coaching his whole life. I would say he's one of the coaches who has started at such a young age. Like, he was involved in the sport, I believe, as a sub-junior, and was coaching even very, very early on, and has a ton of experience. He's coached at numerous world championships, and in fact, this year, he's coaching at the Open World Championships, the Junior World Championships, which I've already passed, and the upcoming Masters World Championships. So a diverse range of skills. He also won in 2023, I'm going to say. The TSF Team Champs are a coveted team event here at TSF. And so you know that he has a formidable team, he has a formidable group of lifters, and they're all performing very, very well. And so I hope you enjoy this episode. We talk about some interesting topics. We talk a little bit about his coaching methods and his protocols. He has a background in psychology. And so he talks about how he kind of leans on his psychology knowledge to elicit positive change, behavioral change, and good training outcomes. So enjoy the episode, and I'll see you on the other side.
I still feel like I'm not very sure with being very definitive with what works. I think the whole process itself is something that is always like you're trying to navigate throughout unknown territories in many ways, and it's really just how you make a decision in the best way of what you know in the moment, like, and then things kind of evolve from there.
Do you think there's like a part of that's like imposter syndrome? Like, do you feel like this user was, I'm not sure? Is that something that's come about more recently in your work, or you feel like you've always never been confident? Not that you're
I
not
think
confident. I know you're confident, but
so. More so, I feel very confident in my approach and decisions in a way where I have to feel confident about it, because if I don't, then I'll be kind of stuck in this like hands tied and not making any decisions. But I think I just accept that there's always going to be unknown. Like, the world is chaotic. The things that we do sometimes may have really high predictability, sometimes they might not, and I think that's just life.
do you get like I think like one of the challenges that I find in coaching is, you find things that work, and then sometimes things just don't work. Like, you run a system, or you run a protocol, you repeat a protocol with a person and it worked before and it doesn't work again, and
Yeah, exactly.
someone stalled for 6 months or 12 months. It's like, does that affect your confidence and make you doubt what you're doing, or is it just a reality that you have to accept? And how do you help clients accept that? I think one thing you even said to me was about client acceptation, or acceptance is what you said to me.
Yeah, yeah. I think it is something that I accept as reality of life, because that's not only something to do with coaching, but life is unpredictable and chaotic. But the best way we can navigate through it is trying to find some kind of solution to move forward in the direction you want to go. But in terms of what that solution is, I'm not sure if anyone can always have the definitive answer. So, like, going back to like what you were saying about like trying to find the secret keys that every coach has, that's why I said at the start, I don't know if there is secret keys. There's obviously like fundamental things that coaches and athletes should be doing, but like this acceptance of a chaotic world is something that I think is quite important.
Yeah, like, I'd be curious, like, it's obviously impossible to know and measure, but like, what percentage of coaches, or like, what is the success rate, I suppose, if you could measure that? Like all coaches, even the best coaches with the best reputations, will have plateaued clients. We'll have lifters that aren't improving, that are stuck, that are getting injured repeatedly and not improving. And it's like, I think it can be hard as a coach, because when you observe your colleagues online, especially on social media, Instagram, YouTube, whatever, everyone's obviously sharing their highlights. Like, you're not posting about your clients that are stalled. You're posting about your clients that are doing well, that are improving. Hey, here's my lifter. They just did a meet and they added 25 kilos to the total. Hey, this is my other lifter. She just had a baby 12 months ago, and now she's back up to equal PRs. Like that's the kind of stuff you share. And so when you as a coach or I as a coach have my clients that are struggling and I'm seeing everyone around me succeeding, it feels like, oh shit, am I doing something horribly wrong? When the reality is everyone has struggles and every coach is having difficulties with some clients. And there, like you said, there's no secret keys. Like every coach, even the best in the world, are going to have those issues.
Yeah, 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 exactly. I do think there are fundamental things that enable some coaches to be able to work out those plateaus more, but I think they're more so things that might be more so linked towards personality and on both ends of like both the coach and the athlete. And that drives like the behavior that's needed of doing the actual specific things like programming technique, communication with the athlete, communication with the coach, and yeah, figuring things out on that end.
No, interesting. I'm sure we'll get into it. Look,
Yeah.
Victor, obviously wanted to get you on. This will be episode 4 of Practical Powerlifting. And, one of the reasons that you're on so quickly, or one of the early guests, I suppose, is because I respect you so highly. I think a lot of you, and we have a fairly healthy relationship. I think most people listening to this will probably already know at least a little bit about you, because I'm sure, being an early part of the early stages of this podcast, a lot of the listeners will be some of your own, I guess, fans. Do we use the word fans? That sounds weird. Or some people that follow me. But for those that don't, do you want to give us a bit of a run through about who you are, what's your background, how long you've been coaching for, what's your business, what's your main shtick?
Sure. So my name's Victor. I operate a powerlifting coach as a powerlifting coach in a powerlifting coaching business, Uplift Performance. I've been coaching since 2016, so this would be my 10th, I guess, going into 11th year of powerlifting coaching, and involved in the sport since 2015, so competitive within that realm. I have been able to coach many people from different walks of life, which I feel really grateful for, and it's been something that has now built up towards one of like the biggest part of my life, being a coach. And on the side of that, I am someone who is deeply interested in psychology, in philosophy. So from that pursuit side, I am doing my studies in psychology. I actually did a pause in my master's this year though, because I'm traveling heaps for coaching. So I guess that is something that I can just take and finish off whenever time and the where my life aligns for it. But I'm wanting to make sure that I am giving absolutely everything I can into coaching at the moment.
Yeah, and you started your coaching kind of career, I suppose, at Melbourne Uni Powerlifting Club. And that was mainly like, that's where you started your lifting career, I suppose. And
Yeah,
so you obviously
exactly.
had a lot of mentorship there and learnt a lot there. But mainly your work's online, I suppose, now, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So 98%, 99% of my business is online. I do a handful of face-to-face sessions still, about 5 sessions a week. And that's more so just for me to maintain the skill set of face-to-face coaching, which is something I significantly value. But more so just to also just catch up to people, not be a online desk jockey where I just don't talk to anyone really. And yeah, just to actually keep that connection with the people I see.
Yeah, be a total online hermit living in your
Intel.
mum's basement. Just
Exactly.
no, not like
Exactly.
that at all. Look, you recently came back from Junior Worlds, and that's kind of where I wanted to start because did you come back from Junior Worlds? Yes, you did, and you also went to Open Worlds, and I think one of the unique perspectives that you have that a lot of coaches won't have is so much experience at international level, both as a lifter and as a coach. You've competed internationally, coached internationally. How was Worlds, first off?
Well, it's just really cool. It's really cool to be able to be a part of the Australian team and support the athletes that actually get to go to Worlds. I think the scope of competition that I see from the international level, it sometimes feels like it makes me really appreciate how good we have it in Australia, because sometimes at Worlds, I actually think the standard of lifting there, maybe the talent is very high, but in terms of like how good quality our local, national level meets are, how involved everyone is, and I think actually how solid our own national coaching is as well. Like it is definitely something that reminds me like we have it really, really good in Australia. The standard's set really high.
As in, like, even the standard of coaching, the standard of the athletes,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
because this was Junior Worlds. So this was Junior IPF Worlds in Costa Rica that you went to
Mm,
recently. And then earlier in the year, you went to Germany for Open Worlds as well.
exactly. Yeah.
What are these experiences like? Like, do you feel like you learn a lot when you're at these international events, or is it mainly business and work for you?
Definitely learning heaps, and I think a big part of me being there is actually just feeling like I am continuing to work towards what is the pinnacle of the sport and being able to, I guess, participate within that. What I mean about how the standard in Australia is really high is that often being in the warm up room, you get people who don't really know what they're doing, coaches who don't really know how to crunch numbers as well in the back room and really strategize. Of course, you get a lot of people who do know what they're doing, but even in terms of some of the top nations that we see from like Instagram and stuff, like seeing them as like the top nations, I think there's definitely things that still can be improved on from many other nations apart just to get their lifters towards that next level.
Do you have like an example, like without dobbing anyone in, but was there certain examples or an anecdote where you're like you really felt the difference in like coaching quality between countries or lifters or athletes?
I think like very clear examples would be really big nations not realizing things like the bar for bench press, the rings needs to be touching, like it needs to be covered.
Oh, you're talking like literally rules, like the literal rules. Some
Yeah,
lifters don't
man.
know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like pretty huge egregious things where like the lifters aren't actually abiding by the rules and stuff like that.
Man, that's that's dangerous stuff. Yeah, like I went to numerous worlds. I haven't been to one in a long time. Last one I went to was 10 years ago. And I went to four worlds in a row in 2013, 14, 15, 16. And one thing I often said about going to worlds was I called it like powerlifting intensives because like for a whole week you're just basically surrounded by very good coaches, very good lifters. It's like it's almost like a what do you call it? Like a retreat. Like when people go to Bali and they do yoga like twice a day and like they just like fully immerse themselves. It's like that. It's like an immersive experience where all you're doing is powerlifting. It's like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. basically for 7 days straight. The training hall's full of like top lifters. And so you just get this like huge dose of powerlifting in one go. And I always felt like, you'd watch more good squats and bench presses and deadlifts in that one week than you would for the rest of the year combined, basically. So I've always found worlds and Oceanias to be very potent learning experiences because you're having conversations and you're having practical experience. Obviously, like actually coaching lifters, trying to pick out good attempts, watching how other coaches go about doing their things, watching how other coaches are tapering. Like someone's doing their last taper session 3 days out, and you're like, oh, that's different. I wouldn't have done that, but it works. Like whatever it might be. So I always found worlds to be these types of things. I mean, when I went, worlds was a lot less competitive and a lot more camaraderie, I think. I don't know what it's like nowadays. I imagine it's a bit more intense. And I mean, of course, this is going to be a great community, but I imagine it's a bit more competitive in the sense of like, you know, countries are there to win and to perform well. Is that the case or am I missing the boat there?
I think like probably back in the day, say like 10 plus years ago, information about powerlifting wasn't spread nearly as much as what it is today.
Very
So
true.
like when you go to those events, like you're actually learning things that are so foreign towards what you normally do, what you know. You understand things from this really unique and novel lens. Whereas I think these days, most information that people do, even things that are really different, like Agatha doing SBD 7 days a week, her coach is someone who's wanting to kind of talk about that and spread information. And I actually did get to speak to Powell both at Open and Juniors just to like kind of pick his brains a little bit. But he's someone who's like running courses about SBD 7 days a week. So I think instead of having that kind of like knowledge knowledge camp, yes, it is that because coaches get to chat with each other, and I feel that level of camaraderie with the other coaches that are at the Worlds. But more so that I do think with these events these days, it's not something that I feel like a big learning experience of new coaching or like programming things that I
Like a lot of
learned.
that information is accessible nowadays, so you don't need to go to Worlds to learn it. You can go and watch people's YouTube channels and read their articles and read their books and do their mentorships. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think in that aspect is probably a bit different.
Yeah, for sure. I think when I was going, it was very much like an information interchange because you had all these not trade secrets, but it's like yeah, people just weren't openly sharing things, not for any reason other than practicality. Like there was no reason to do so. Whereas now it's very different. Okay, let's get a little bit into your actual coaching and a little bit about the way that you kind of apply yourself. Like you mentioned, you're coming into 11 years now, and like you're not old by any means. So it's like this has basically been your whole life, I guess, like in terms of like a professional career. And so you've kind of got a lot of experience. And I asked you about your coaching philosophy, and one thing you told me, you kind of like divvy it up into three main pillars, I suppose, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the teacher, the supporter, and the tactician. Talk us through this perspective and like where this came from and why it's so clear to you in your mind that a coaching philosophy should have these three pillars, or your coaching philosophy does at least.
Yeah, so I guess with the three pillars, I like to kind of think about things and categorize things in my mind for my own understanding. The big way of why and how I actually came to thinking about these three main pillars was actually when I was writing up the content for my mentorship and really just thinking about what is the role of the coach, what are the main important things, what are the hats that we wear, and the three pillars of being tactician, teacher, and supporter. Tactician mainly just being there to be the problem solver, I guess navigating throughout any kind of problems and being there to direct the athlete towards the direction that they need to be at. I actually like to think about the coaching relationship as a relationship where the athlete is the captain of their own ship and the coach is there to navigate them throughout whatever direction they want to go, whatever destination they want to be at. But the coach can actually see a little bit better because they're like perched up high on the mast, whereas the captain's there steering the ship down at the bottom, and they might not have as good visibility of the landscape. So yeah, that's really how I kind of think about the tactician side, is to help guide the athlete and strategize on that front. The teacher is to actually, as you probably would understand, just to teach the athlete different skills, whether it is related towards their practical aspect of their training, allowing them to understand programming, their execution of technique, but also I think it's important as a teacher to instill a mindset that is bolstering their athletic ability. And I think like an athletic mindset is someone who is able to push through hardship. They're able to be accepting of the ebbs and flows of normal training and I guess of many aspects about life as well, but also have that, I guess, that inner dog, that fire, that that has that drive to always consistently get better. And then the supporter is being that person who will stand by the athlete no matter whatever happens. I guess giving that unconditional support and enabling the athlete to feel like there is someone who's always in their corner, no matter how difficult things are going. They've got this one person who will always strive to make things better or push them back towards the right direction.
I love that. I love how clear and like concise and easy it is to kind of like understand all of this. You mentioned under the teacher kind of column about teaching about an athlete mindset. It's one thing I feel like I've struggled with as a coach over many years is trying to teach that. Like some people just have it and some people don't. Especially I don't know what your practice would be like because I suppose like you're online, so you'd probably get a lot more people that are kind of more motivated and a bit more intermediate. Whereas in the gym space, like we get a lot of beginners, people that are walking in have no experience in sport, and they know they're supposed to get stronger, like literally never touched a barbell before. Or done sports. Whereas most people that are starting with you, I presume, have a background, have been training at least for a little while. Maybe they're already competitive and have done some comps. But I find it very hard to teach people an athletic mindset. I find it very hard to teach someone to grit their teeth, and you've got to, like, if you really want these goals, you have to like have a bit of dog in you, like you said, right? It's not easy. Like, is that something you think, like, using like leaning on your experience, but also your knowledge of psychology, is that something that can be taught? Like, and how do you go about doing that? How do
I
you
think
teach someone to
absolutely.
have dog in them? Like, how do you, like, it's so challenging, right?
It is a challenge, but I actually disagree about the point that most people come with me already with that mindset and mentality.
Okay.
I think it is definitely something that is fostered within the people that you work with, and especially even throughout my earlier days coaching at the uni, most people there, they've also never done sports before in their life, and all they've done is just focus on studying. They've found this random club that they just want to start exercising in, and even during those times it was something that I thought to be super important. One thing that I find really important with fostering that athlete mentality is the language and the communication that I take with them. So what I am very conscious to do is that when I speak about my roster, I talk about them saying as athletes instead of clients, because
Mm-hmm.
even within that framework of athletes or clients, it's a different kind of not label, but a different kind of identity that people take with that. And with all the little things that we do as coaches, say giving advice and instruction of what they should be doing, I always am quite careful to frame things in a way that gives them a little bit more onus with the decisions that they're making. And I think that in itself is taking more power for themselves to actually be an athlete and achieve the goals that they have. Because at the end of the day, it's them who does the work. So if they feel more power or more onus to do the things, then they're actually going to go and do the work in order to get better, which is their goal.
Yeah, to me it sounds like already you're trying to frame things from a lens of like identity, like calling them an athlete, not a client. Like I'm sure you'd have had this conversation before where you say that and someone will be like, oh, I'm not an athlete. And you kind of have to be like, yes, you are. Of course you are. Like you're training for athletics. Like you're an athlete. But like people like will snob it off and be like, no, I'm not an athlete. But I think you're right. Like even those word choices already start to, and there'll be lots of people that don't say anything, but because you keep using that word, it just like plants in their mind and like that actually has an effect. It's maybe a small effect, but it's there for sure. And gives them that ownership. I think is like a good word. Like gives them ownership of their own training.
Absolutely, exactly that. And I guess from a practical standpoint, one thing that I took very early on, whenever someone on boards with me, I try to lock them into a competition within the next 3 months. So therefore, they have a objective goal that they're working towards that is reflecting of what they want to be doing with us working together. So if they come to me to get stronger in powerlifting, well, we need to have a goal to be working towards, and it gives them that tangible thing to plan and I guess feel feel like they are building towards, and especially with people who are getting into it. I think it's very common to have the sentiment that then they feel like they're not strong enough. They want to do a comp when they feel somewhat accomplished, but I think all of that's bullshit, because it's something that we'll always feel. We're always going to feel like we want to be better, but it is something that will just have framed way more ownership over what they do in their lives. So maybe if they're someone who goes out partying all the time, they eat like shit, they don't sleep. Having that competition gives you more purpose and meaning behind working hard and doing all the other things to actually perform at your best.
Another thing that I found really interesting is that you said you use these words, teaching athletes to give you the right information under the title of teacher, which I thought was such an interesting kind of like perspective. Like, it's not just teaching athletes, okay, this is how to squat and this is how to change the rack height and this is how to pull your shoulders back. You actually make a conscious effort to teach athletes what information to give you. What is that information? Like, what is information that you need and how do you get them to do that correctly?
Well, when it comes to the decisions we make as coaches and whether we feel like these decisions are enabling the athlete to, or steering them to actually make more progress, those decisions have to come from something. And for me, the decisions are mostly framed on the feedback that an athlete gives me. The kind of feedback that I look for are more so perceptions of how certain lifts are feeling, how certain days are feeling as well. And with being very clear with what kind of feedback I'm looking for, not only does that help teach an athlete to have better awareness and proprioception of what they're feeling during the lift, but also just filtering out some of the less important details that I think sometimes some people can get really caught up on, and just being able to give information that is very clear and concise, so that way I can then help know what is happening and then make the according decisions to actually get things moving in I guess, a better direction.
Do you ever get instances where like a client or an athlete will be giving you like information that is just superfluous and they're just like yapping on and on about this like minor detail that you're just like, this doesn't matter. And you have to kind of say like, hey, like that kind of stuff is just not that important? Or are you more like, well, if they think it's a big deal, then it is a big deal, and I should kind of pay attention to that. Like, from with this perspective of teaching an athlete to give you the right information. If they're giving you information that's not important, do you like how do you
Yeah,
manage that?
I get this quite frequently. Say, for example, an athlete who always ties their performance to external factors like what rack they're using, what the bench feels like, and always just being very external focused. So I guess an external locus of control, more so meaning like they feel like their lives and their decisions are controlled by factors outside of that. That's when I am really, really clear and honest with articulating that. And I'll say very honestly, like, dude, the rack that you use, it just doesn't it doesn't matter. Like, all of that, I don't give a fuck that you used the wrong rack, and you should really just focus on the things that you need to do and you have control over, because if you continue to focus on whatever rack you use, like, it's a pretty fucking dangerous spiral where you're going to never really have that much control over your training.
Yeah,
And
like
in reality, like comps, you got no idea what you're going to have either.
yeah, like I guess how do you like? It's one thing to tell an athlete honestly, like, hey man, like that doesn't matter, but if they really think it matters, like if for them it's interfering with their training, like let's say someone is so neurotic that they have to be using the Alico or whatever, and then the Alico is taken, so they have to use the ER, and it's consistently affecting their training. I mean, it's one thing for a coach to be like, "Hey, dude, it doesn't matter," but that doesn't change their mindset. You know, like how do you actually go about changing their mindset? How do you go about helping them kind of consolidate or reconcile that? Like, okay, how do I let go of this thing that I'm so neurotic about? Because if someone's neurotic, they're neurotic. Like, it's very difficult to break those feelings and thoughts.
And I think that's where it's really important to teach an athlete how to accept that it will be chaotic, and there is always going to be a level of uncertainty within everything that we do. Like, if you feel like using the Alico rack over the ER gives you a bit more security, it is only a false sense of security, because at the end of the day, you will never actually have that much control over what equipment you're going to have in competition. And it's more so just gently nudging them towards the direction of just giving less fuck about things that actually don't really matter. So I do think it is within a coach's role to gently guide an athlete out of that. It
If
might be
you
due to like their own personality or any kind of, I guess, history of dealing with neuroticism, but at least in the scope of us working together, I still would want to guide them towards being more accepting of just accepting they don't have control over everything.
Would you ever go so far as to say, to tell an athlete to lean into the things that they think are making things go badly? Like using this ER rack example. Like if someone was like saying, oh, it's because I was stuck on the ER rack, so my bench went shit or whatever. Would you go so far as to say, look, for the next 8 weeks, you have to use the ER rack. You're banned from using the Alico, and I just want you to get comfortable using it. Like, is that something that you would actively do, or that's going too far, I suppose?
When you ask that question, is it more so to lean in on it just to see if it actually works? Or is it more so to test, to show them, like, look, like you can be like this, and in reality, it's not gonna work out. It's all gonna fall apart. Like, I'm just trying to understand the question.
Well, I mean, like, would that be a strategy as a coach that you would use, like, for whatever reason? Like, maybe there's a good reason, maybe there's not a good reason. I don't know. But is that something that you would do, or like you don't think that's actually important to kind of do?
I think it depends on their personality. I think if it's more so just due to overly neurotic, I would very much so steer far away from that, because I think it promotes that kind of mentality. It promotes those same thoughts to be had, and it makes it probably more perpetual towards other aspects of their training. Whereas if it's something that I notice that they're really keen on, let's say maybe they have some kind of ritual for their setup for, like, let's say a bench press, like I'll give an example. Some people may or may not know. One of my good friends, George Alex, he does this really, really elaborate kind of like exorcism before he gets on the bench press, and it takes quite a lot of time to do, like 40 seconds. So like that kind of kills up the clock, but he's not really that neurotic of a person. So if I were coaching Alex and I know that he needs to do this to feel like he's getting in groove, then I would 100% encourage it, because it actually does bolster his performance. But it's not coming from a state of being really neurotic. He has to do this thing. It's more so like he feels like it does help with his performance.
No, that's interesting. How do you feel like, your interest in knowledge and education in psychology has affected your coaching, and how do you think it affects your coaching compared to other coaches who don't have the background in psychology? Like, I guess, what are the lessons that you've learned in psychology that you apply into your actual practice?
I think the main thing is actually the way that I communicate to my athletes. That even goes back to what I was saying about fostering an athlete mentality, being really careful with the words I use in terms of how it then frames their identity. I think that's probably one manifest of that. But it's also more so to, I think I've been able to assist athletes and guide them throughout difficult periods of their training, probably with a bit more insight from knowing a bit more about psychology, like particularly with burnout, with when motivation's quite low. I think that's helped me have a little bit more, I guess, of an edge in being able to navigate throughout those situations.
Right. It's like, I guess, like, the reason I ask is because I think about a lot of coaches who are very mechanical in their approach. And I spoke about this a little bit in, I think it was episode 2 or episode 3, about coaches who are so mechanical in their approach that they really treat a human body as like a machine, right? Where they say, okay, input, program, output, results. And I guess there might be some coaches out there who fail to see the dynamic psychology of a lifter, right? You talked about burnout and fluctuating motivation and stuff. Whereas I think I imagine because I've never worked with you personally, but I imagine one of your strengths is the fact that you have a very strong knowledge of like programming principles and the actual mechanics of training, but also like how that interplays with an athlete's psychology and how do you actually and an athlete's motivation and how they interact with their training and the world, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned the input outputs. A saying that I heard from Mike Teixeira, that I really, really like is, we're not working with machines, we're actually more so working with plants as coaches. So, so instead of thinking of like a direct input where there's always going to be a predictable output, it's more so the case of us creating the right conditions that foster a athlete to grow or to get stronger. And that's quite similar to like a gardener, where let's say whenever you grow a watermelon, like it always kind of needs this similar climate with this kind of wetness of soil. I got no clue with it with like actual gardening. So I'm just kind of
Need the
making
right
up.
conditions.
Yeah, exactly. So there might always be similar conditions, but for every different type of watermelon, depending on where you are in the world, there's also going to be very specific nuances that you're going to have to take, and that's really the role of the coach is actually understanding a lot of the nuances of the athlete. They may have the very similar they may have very similar leverages as someone else that you work with, but their life conditions are very different. Then you're going to have to take quite a different approach as well.
Yeah, like I think one thing that I think Mike T says, I think I heard it first from the boys at Melbourne Strength Culture, like at least the wording that I'm about to use is like you can't force strength gains, you can only facilitate them. And like you can't force your way forward. You just have to set the right conditions and like your plant analogy, the plant will grow if the conditions are right. If you're doing the right amount of training and the right amount of all this stuff, the improvement will come. But if you try to, butt your head forward, it doesn't always work that way. You also mentioned being a supporter, which I think is like a very typical kind of position that a lot of coaches will have with their lifters. Naturally we develop quite good relationships with our lifters, with our athletes, talking to them frequently, seeing them frequently if they're in the physical space, being there for them in ways that are beyond lifting. Often being I guess someone to listen, I suppose, to like what's going on in their life. And I'm sure like even in your practice, you're asking questions about how things are going outside of training, how's your work going, how's your relationships going, how's your family going, all that kind of stuff. Do you do you ever find issues, or how do you, I guess, navigate the boundaries between being a supporter and becoming friends to the point that it's actually detrimental to your relationship? Because, if you've got 50 lifters on your roster, you can't be 50, you can't, for a lot of people, like you're one of their closest people, but when you've got 50 people, you can't have 50 best friends. And so how do you kind of like draw that line, or do you pay much attention to that line?
Well, am I do have very, very close friendships with a number of the people I've worked with, some that I've developed over the course of us working together, and have now become really good friends. Just to give an example, there was an athlete that I've coached for 8 years, and I am now like about to go to his wedding next year. Like it is natural to actually develop a really good relationship with your athletes. I guess like in terms of drawing the line of the boundary between coaching and friend, as long as I'm able to deliver my work as a coach and not make compromise of that, I don't see me becoming good friends with an athlete to actually detract away from that. Because for me, just my personality, I am someone who's quite honest with how I speak to people. And let's say if I become good friends with someone, when I'm coaching them, I will still continue to be very honest with my feedback in a way that I have always been. So it's not like it's going to detract away from the friendship by any means because they feel like I am, I don't know, like being mean or something. It's always what I will be, but also as a friend, I am like that as well to like people that I'm close with outside of powerlifting.
Yes, so you don't find it particularly difficult to like segment, the friend relationship and the coach athlete relationship, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Is that something that you find to be difficult?
I would say yes and no. Like there have been times and periods in my career where I have found it harder. Not that I find it hard to distinguish between friend and athlete. Like that's not hard. But what I found is sometimes lifters want to be friendlier with you than you want to be with them. Like I said, like, if you've got 50 lifters on your roster, like I can't hang out with all of my lifters every week all the time.
Of course, yeah.
And I don't necessarily, and I say this with love to all of my lifters, I don't necessarily like all of my lifters, the way that they might like me. And that might sound very like, I suppose, I don't know, that might sound a little bit arrogant, I suppose, but it's just the reality of it. Like, lifters will often choose you as a coach because they like you, they like what you have to say, they like your social media presence. But again, I just can't be friends with everyone. So yeah, I was just wondering if you've ever had issues with that, because being a supporter is like a clear pillar in your coaching philosophy, and if you're trying to support all of your lifters emotionally as well, it can be, I don't know, it can be draining. At least I find it can be draining, but maybe you don't find that the case.
I think with emotional support, that a big part of that is also being able to be clear with the information that they give you. Of course, it's really important to understand some more broader things that might be happening within their lives, but it's also important to set that boundary of what is probably the most appropriate to communicate, especially to their powerlifting coach. And if they're communicating things that are seemingly a bit more broad and outside of scope, I think it's so important to set that boundary and be clear that I think you should probably get more external help from a professional about this thing, because I don't feel like I can support you in that.
Yeah, it's almost like staying in your lane, right? It's like saying like, hey man, this is beyond me. Like if someone snaps their shit up, it's like, dude, I don't know how to fix this. Like I'm not a physiotherapist. So similarly, if someone's, coming to you with these deeper problems, it's like, we're friends, but it's like, man, this is beyond me. I can't do this.
Yeah, and it's the same way, like if one of your friends that aren't like just completely outside of powerlifting is saying things to you like that, it's the same way that you should kind of hold up that boundary. Not in terms of like keeping a space, but it's more so to protect both the friend and yourself in both ways.
Yeah, it's like just doing what's right for them and guiding them.
Yeah, I think like from my perspective with the supporter, the main thing that is most important with playing that role is always instilling hope within the athlete when things aren't really going well. Because especially when people are going throughout burnout, when they've lost that drive to put in the work, it's so important as a coach to be able to instill hope and feel like they can keep on moving forward. Because I've worked with athletes that have had like really long plateaus and have been injured for well over the course of 1 year. But it's especially important during those periods if they are still having that inkling of wanting to keep on going despite being in a lot of pain all the fucking time and not feeling like they're making progress. Like I really try to foster and I guess kindle the flames of that hope to make sure that they are wanting to keep on going, because I guess for me it might be a bit I guess hopeful, but I have this belief that things will always get better, and we can always still find a solution. If the solution isn't clear for us right now, I will keep on trying to find that solution until things do get a bit more clear and until we start to move towards a better direction.
How do you instill that hope? Is it just a case of relentless optimism and positivity, or is it different for different people? Like what kind of patterns do you see there in terms of instilling hope in someone when
Well, I
things
think,
aren't going well?
well, especially if things aren't going well and you can kind of start to see their motivation come a bit lower, it's also good to have that conversation for them to, or like to remind them like, okay, like what is your main goal at the moment? What do you want to be doing? And from a more practical level, I try to actually change up what we do within training in a way that is informed by what that problem is. Like if it's an injury, then I will completely change up their program and not do the things that actually are causing them to be in pain. And if they're feeling really burnt out where they're not feeling motivated to do certain training, then I'll shift gears. Like I will actually change up the plan to give them that hope of it moving forward. It might work, it might not, but I'll explain the plan in the way where we're making these changes because of X, Y, and Z, and this is why I think it will work. Being very clear of what those changes are, so at least the athlete feels like, okay, like they're in this current position, but at least my coach is wanting to get me out of that. He's actually like actively trying and making the changes to at least move forward.
Do you ever do make those changes proactively, or is it generally a reactive thing? That is, if a lifter is showing signs of low motivation, someone that was always filling in their spreadsheets now filling it in like 80%, someone that was always training 4 days a week suddenly starts missing a session once a month or twice a month. Do you wait for that, or will you ever like make proactive steps? So like one thing that I'm thinking about now is like, for example, let's say someone's run like four or five consecutive hard powerlifting blocks, like twice a week, 3 times a week squat, 4 or 5 times a week bench. Like it's very powerlifting and like it's relentless, like hard blocks. Even if they're saying, sometimes lifters lie, maybe not lie, but they like kind of like sugarcoat what they're saying. And they might say they're motivated. Will you ever make the call and say, hey, look, for the next 3 weeks, we're going to do something totally different just to change things up, giving you a mental freshen up, and then we'll like pivot back into some hard training again? Or I guess like how much do you rely on the feedback that you're getting versus your own intuition going, I think actually this person needs something different before it even becomes a problem, like before they even lose motivation?
So one thing that I do that's kind of baked in how I go about my coaching process after multiple really, really highly intensive blocks that are high in specificity, but actually very high in intensity, I always write a pivot block where they move away from specificity and they just focus on pushing bodybuilding movements really hard and variation lifts really hard. So that's something that I always do anyway, particularly after competitions. So that's essentially my way of being a bit more proactive in baking that process into my systems. But if I have the intuition of things might already be happening towards or going towards a certain direction where I need to elicit a change, I will always be willing to do that. I'm someone who makes mid-block changes within someone's program probably a bit more frequently than other coaches. And it's more so just due to that intuition of, okay, I think this actually thing might work a bit better. It's coming from their feedback. So maybe it might be a combination of intuition and also reactive to an athlete's feedback. But I'm fairly gung-ho with actually making changes as long as I do have strong belief that it will be better.
No, interesting. I like what you said about changing things mid-block. I think a lot of coaches would be too proud to make changes mid-block as if it's admitting that they've made a mistake. But I think the willingness to make those changes mid-block says that you're open to the feedback, you're open to adjusting. Like what I often say is like, your program is just a plan, but it was a plan that was written a while ago. Like if it's a six-week program and you're in week 4, well, the information that program was written with is now 4 weeks expired. And so new information is coming to light and we have to be willing to adapt as we go. So yeah, like
exactly.
you said, I think a lot of coaches may be a bit too proud to admit halfway through a program, okay, it's probably a bad idea to give you twice a week deadlifts, for example. So let's change things up.
But I think it's probably also just not really giving a fuck or just can't be bothered changing in those cases.
Yeah, like maybe some lazy coaching going on. Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about training, actual training stuff. One thing you and I have a habit of doing is having very good and lengthy conversations about differences in opinion on training related things, which we'll maybe go into, maybe not. We'll see what kind of comes up.
I think it'll be interesting, yeah.
You talked a little bit about, prior to this, about how you go about prescribing intensities. In the past, you used to prescribe load-based purely or load prescribed ahead of time. And then you pivoted totally to RPE for a while. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So earlier days in my coaching, I pretty much wrote out a 9 to 10 week long block ahead of time and everything was pre-planned. Everything was top down. So top down meaning that all decisions that were made based on training were coming from my expectations of how things go, my experience of what I thought would work and kind of map it out from there. Then after being coached by Adam Jones from Reactive Training Systems, I got pretty deep in terms of how they go about their coaching processes, and I did their course and completely changed my process around to being fully bottoms up. So bottoms up is more so well, the actual practical process was fully RPE based training where RPEs would not really change across a full block, and you're just repeating the same week over and over again and seeing whether the athlete makes progress, builds up strength throughout the block. So
It's like
pretty
typical
much,
emerging strategies type of thing.
yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean by fully bottoms up, of just allowing training response to reveal from the response itself. Whereas these days, I actually take much more of a mixed approach, meaning that I prescribe RPEs for top sets still somewhat frequently, but I already have an idea of where a block could go to. So I would, if it is pretty clear for me that we need to get to a certain point. So particularly if they are lining up for competition, I will already write out ranges across the entire block. So it gives a rough framework of where we should be building throughout a block. And majority, if not all of back down sets, they're all prescribed. Like I've written out the load for it.
On main lift specifically, obviously.
Yeah. For main lifts. If it's like an accessory, like a pendulum squat, I might even program that as well because it's like quite
Consistent,
predictable in terms of
repeatable.
the, yeah, exactly. But the reason why I do that is because I don't want back down sets to be tied so closely to a top set performance, meaning that if their top set is a day where they feel so garbage in and they pull back the load, I don't want the back down sets being the main driver of progress to be tied towards that. So the back down sets that I program, they're not really ever super hard nor like ultra easy. They're always kind of in that middle ground. So no matter what day you go up to training with, like you can have an absolute shocker of a day of sleep, those back down sets won't ever kill you. Like you're not going to fail your back down sets. So that's why I always program them ahead of time. So that way, at least one variable of progression from a macro level is something that I always have control over. So I can always like manipulate the small details with those back downs and have that momentum going. Whereas the top set is still tied to an RPE, but within the range of what that load range is. So maybe like a 5 to, if like bench 2.5, within that 2.5, within squat and dead, maybe within 7.5 to 5. And I just want to make sure that even as we make our way throughout the block, even if you're having an absolute shocker of a day, you don't go anything below that range unless you're like actually looking like you're about to get injured. Because one thing that I've changed my mind on, and it kind of reflects my change from away from the pure RP based training, is with a lot of coaches that program fully RP based, there's this sentiment that if if a single at an 8 is hit, but even with varied loads, the way that your body interprets the stimulus or the load is responding in the same way. And that's something I don't necessarily believe in as much these days. I don't think that if you hit a single at an 8 at 100 kilos versus a single at an 8 at 105 kilos, the stimulus on your body is not the same thing because the load is different. So fundamentally, the load is the main thing that is driving progress. So therefore, that is the main thing that we need to at least have some kind of bandwidth with. And the RP prescription itself is to work within that range of load prescription.
Yeah, so you don't necessarily think that proximity to failure dictates the adaptation. Rather, it's like the actual load on the bar.
Absolutely, yes.
And it's interesting because you obviously started like fully load based, under the Wilkes School of Powerlifting, and then learned a lot about RPE, and then you went kind of fully deep in that. And you've kind of come to this conclusion yourself, right? It's not like, I guess like with all things, like people in powerlifting can be quite dogmatic in their thinking and really like, identify with like, well, I'm an RP guy and RP is the best. And if you don't think RP is the best, then you're an idiot. And there'll be other people on the other side of that as well. Whereas you sound very like free thinking, where you're like, well, I've tried both, and this is what the patterns I've noticed, and this is what I think works best for my systems and my lifters and the way that I go about doing things. Because yeah, I mean, like one of the key tenets of auto-regulated training is that the intensity is defined as like proximity to failure. Like an RPE 8, if this week you did an RPE 8 and it was 200, and next week RPE 8 is 190, that's the same stimulus. But you're
Yeah.
saying it's not.
Yes, yes. And I finally don't think it is the same stimulus, and therefore, uh, yeah, training shouldn't be framed purely around that.
Yeah, you said before about like, by pre-prescribing or by load prescribing the back downs, you can at least control one variable, is what you said. And like one thing I know about your coaching style or your programming style is, I mean, you even used the word when I was speaking to you before about tinkering. Like you like to like keep things stable and then make changes almost constantly, like always like fluctuating things and just seeing how lifters respond and stuff. Can you talk to us a bit about that and what's involved?
Yeah, sure. So
Because like I know, for
essentially,
example, in like, sorry to interrupt you, but I know like in like emergent strategies, that's a similar thing. Like they're very big on like repeating a microcycle and only changing things as they go. Is it that deep, like the way that emerging strategies works, or are you a bit more frequent, less frequent? I don't know.
so with emerging strategies, just to clarify, with once a block is set up, no changes are made ever.
Okay.
Even if things aren't working well, you don't make a change because you're trying to keep variables completely consistent. But in between every single block, so more so from one block transitioning to another one, the next block will be a big change from what you did in the previous one.
So you know
So
what that
when
sounds like to me? That sounds like in emerging strategies that the data is more important than the progress. It's like you'd rather get the data, even if if something's not working, they will just keep repeating it for another couple of weeks until they decide to abandon the program because the data is more important.
Yeah, yeah. I think that actually um, that somewhat is the case. I guess in the long term aspect, yeah, like it doesn't really matter that one block didn't play out well, right? Like it's just one block out of like thousands of blocks that you'll do, and there's no such thing as bad data as well. But I guess in terms of being proactive with making that change, they would rather keep things very consistent and then make the big change for the following block. Yeah. Whereas the way that I go about my process is I will write out a plan of what I think will work, and essentially I will try to make sure within a training week I have a mini peak of how I want a certain day to feel. So I'll have my primary SBD days, and I will try to do everything I can to align the variables to get that day feeling the best across the entire training week. So once I have those days, primary days aligned, then we make our way throughout the training block. Let's say an athlete reports that for their main squat session, they feel like they're not really feeling like the bar that well on their back. Like it feels like it's quite wonky. And of course, I'll go look at the technique. Their technique is really sound. Their workout's really good. They have a good process from that technical aspect. And I look at their secondary day and I see, oh, well, they're only just doing like quite high volume, high bar sets. That's what they're doing. And they're feeling like they're strong in their legs, but they might not feel really solid on the back. The bar kind of feels like it's kind of crushing them down. Then I'll go in halfway throughout the block. I'll add a heavy top double of a pause squat, and then they'll continue forward with a higher volume high bars. And that's essentially what I mean by tinkering around with the program, especially mid block, to see if that added change then elicits the response that I'm hoping to get, which is that they feel better on their primary day and they don't get that feeling of being like crushed by the weight. And then if the subsequent primary session, they then have a significant and noticeable improvement in performance, then I know, okay, this change is what we're going to continue on with moving forward. They need a bit more of that intensity exposure out of their secondary in order to prime their primary.
Yeah. So you really make you make a priority of what you refer to as a mini peak, like making that the main day is as high performance as possible.
Could you just repeat that?
Yeah, like you make a really conscious effort to make that the main day is as high of performance as possible. Like the primaries have to be on performed at a very high level, basically, and you want them to
They,
be feeling their strongest on those days.
it, I would like the athlete to feel like they're performing at their highest on that day. And the reason why I would like that is because I want to know what other conditions needed in order to set them up towards a high performance. So if we're consistently getting a higher performance, even if it's 5% better or even less than that. But a variable that we take in terms of setting up the conditions to lead up towards it, it consistently is a few percents better. Then over the course of time, then they get more productive training. And more importantly, when we run into a competition, I know the exact conditions that are needed in order to set up for a peak in game day.
Yeah, you mentioned like priming a lift. Like what are the types of strategies I guess you've implemented that tend to work consistently well? Like obviously someone listening to this, they can't try everything and like everyone's different, like everyone will respond differently. But what things have you noticed? We're like, oh, this is what are the programming things that you like doing? For example, you've noticed, oh, if I give someone pull squats 2 days before their main squat, that generally is a quite useful thing to do or whatever. I don't know. What kind of like things have you noticed work well?
I think it
Like, I
really
guess every coach got their biases, like things that they like to do. What are things that you found work quite consistently?
so that's one of the things that I don't think I can answer like with a blanket response, mainly because it actually then depends on what the athlete's feeling. So this is what I mean about teaching an athlete how to give good feedback, because depending on what they feel of that lift, then it helps inform me in terms of what decision that I make. So just for example, let's say just talking about the squat, if they do feel like the bar is just crushing down on them, I look at two things: whether they have sufficient intensity exposure in that previous day. If they already have quite high intensity exposure, then it is more so the flip opposite of having too much intensity on that day. So if the feeling or the feedback of the bars crushing down, I would more so looking at intensity, where there's too little or too much. Whereas if they feel like the bar is quite good on their back, but they feel like their legs aren't really responding well, then I would more so look at what are they doing as their back down sets? Are they doing enough back down sets? Are they getting enough volume in there? Maybe if that session's all pull squats, then maybe I can look into just making contest back downs for higher rep work or adding in like 2 sets of pendulum squats.
Yeah, so it sounds like one of the key variables to maximize primary performance is what they're doing on their secondaries and tertiaries.
Correct. Yes.
So the secondaries and tertiaries, almost you manipulate those in order to get this mini peak effect. Like as in, like you're happy to push a secondary or tertiary day or pull back on a secondary or tertiary day or whatever. You tinker with the secondary and tertiaries more than anything to try to get the best performance on the primary.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's essentially what more so I'm thinking of in terms
Right.
of
See,
the
I was
term.
thinking like of tinkering things on the primary, but you're actually talking about the secondaries and tertiaries, which is interesting.
Correct, correct. So, of course, from a long-term perspective, what we do on the primary does matter,
Of
but
course.
I kind of see things from like, I try to see things from this two lens of, one thing is building strength, building up that baseline and just building up overall capacity. And the other aspect is expressing strength. So tinkering around with those smaller details with secondary and tertiaries, that's what helps with expressing the strength. But that is also inclusive of, say, technical factors, like if they're falling forward in their squat, the center of mass is dog shit, then implementing a tempo pause variation on the secondary, that is still going to help with addressing the problem of the primary.
No, that's really interesting. I like that. You mentioned also about if you know what are the variables that you need to make the primary peak, I suppose,
Yeah,
or
setting
this
up the
mini peak.
conditions.
Yeah, if you know what that is, then you're going to have better chances of setting them up well for comp. How do you go about shifting things when it comes around to time for comp, right? Because I presume you don't have lifters doing their primary SPDs on Saturdays all the time, right? Like someone might be doing primary bench on a Friday, primary squats on a Wednesday, primary deadlift on a Monday, for example. But then, 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out, well, suddenly they're going to have to do all the primaries on a Saturday or a Sunday, for example. How do you go about shifting that? Do you keep the primaries on the same days all the way up, and then only in the last week, during the taper or stuff, you make those changes, or do you from 3, 4, 5 weeks out shift it so that they're doing primary SPDs on Saturdays? Like, how do you kind of time this
So
transition?
I generally keep their primary days consistent all the way up to that final week.
Okay.
What I found is the higher the frequency of a lift, the more important it is to keep that primary exposure closer towards the time or the day of competition. So if they're squatting 3 days, I'll try to actually have their main squat day come before their main bench day and have their main bench day on the main day itself. Or it could both be on the day of competition. Whereas deadlift, given that generally for most people is lower frequency, most common 2 times a week, some maybe even 1 time a week, that's where I found it being more flexible in terms of where we put the primary. And I also make sure that if there's someone who has interaction between their deadlift and their squat, let's say they're conventional deadlifter, very hingy squatter, I'll try to actually keep it separate within the week. So that way they get more productive training instead of just trying to always set up things for comp. But once we get up towards that week of competition, that's where I just know, or I check what is their timing between exposures from their secondary into their primary or their previous exposure into their primary. And then I'll just rearrange that final week to line up things exactly the same as how things line up for primary day.
Okay, so let's use an example. Like, let's say someone's doing their primary deadlift on a Wednesday and they're only deadlifting once a week, right?
Yep.
So like they deadlift 2.5 weeks out, they deadlift 1.5 weeks out, and then half a week out, like on the Wednesday before the comp. Are they still going to do a heavy deadlift normally, or are they doing a taper session? Like if they're only deadlifting once a week, they don't even have a secondary to tinker with. So what does it look like normally in that context, for example?
Let's
Just to
say,
give us an idea.
yeah. We'll use that example of the deadlift for the Wednesday. On the peak week, I'll probably just put a taper, a very easy deadlift session, but put it a little bit earlier on in the week. So that way it still has more rest days before competition.
Yeah, and I suppose you use the competitions like they are their own data set, right? Because they're kind of unique, right? So it's like once you've done 2 or 3 or 5 comps with a lifter, you'll start to realize, okay, they need to do their last taper session earlier or later. Like you kind of said before about the mini peak midweek, you've got every week to do that. So you can kind of tinker that all the time, but you can't compete, every week. You're competing 2 or 3 times a year. So
Something that I actually do, and of course, like with rearranging the program of the week, we are changing the days to align the same variables, the same timing between exposures into the primary SPD of competition. But what I do consistently now as a system that I have for pretty much majority, if not most of my athletes, on the final week of every training block, I use something called a back end deload or a test taper week.
Okay, this is interesting. Cool. Tell me. So back end deload or test taper?
Yeah. So I guess in comments, let's even trace it back even more. Like more than 10 years ago, it was normal to run, say, a 4 to 5 week long block and then have a full on deload week at the end of the block. And then you'll come back towards week 1. Over the course of the last few years, one thing that's been really popularized is intro weeks. So essentially, you're going from block to block and you don't have a full-blown taper week, a full-blown deload week. But what week 1 is a pullback in intensity and volume to then have that deload, but also the introduction of what is the next
New
block.
exercises, yeah.
Correct, yes. Whereas what I do now, and I think it's become a little bit more popular among some coaches in the States, a coach that I worked with, Brad Coolyard, was someone who introduced this concept to me, and that's where I've been able to tinker around with it for myself and kind of develop it for myself, which is that at the end of every single training block, often this is the week where we are pushing intensity the highest for those top sets. And for most people, they will probably also be pushing all of their back down sets, all of their accessories really hard within that final week. If we think about what is the most fatigue that is generated within that final week, it's actually more so pushing all of that really hard volume work after the top sets. So what I end up doing now to align the final week is that as an athlete builds up to that final week, they will still have that final top set of the block, let's say double out of 9, single out of 9, 9.5 or whatever. But everything that does come after the primary the primary top set, it's pulled back. It's no hard back down sets. And what I'll actually prescribe is like, let's say if they normally do 3x5 at 77% for that day, what I'll do is 2x5 of week 1 load. So you're essentially doing what is week 1 as the week 5 back downs. And then week 1, you're already going to be a bit fresher to be able to hit it a little bit harder as well. And what the test taper is everything that leads up towards the primary day, any small pullbacks within that, the secondary and tertiary days that lead you up towards that primary, I'm already making those micro adjustments of how much we pull back and how much we pull back the accessories in the lead up towards the primary as a way of testing the taper every single block.
That is so interesting. What I find so interesting about that is I kind of do something like that, but I've never had a name for it. So like what I'll do is if someone's doing like, look, let's say someone does their main squats on a Monday, main deadlift on a Wednesday, main bench on a Friday, for example. And let's say someone's going on a holiday or whatever, and they want to do some testing before they go away on the holiday, and they're going away on a weekend. It's like, well, they don't want to really do a full-on SPD session before they go away on a holiday. Like that's a bit too intense. So they'll just do their testing midweek. They'll do their squat single at 9, like you said, on the Monday, their deadlift single at 9 on a Wednesday. But if they did like their squat single at 9 on a Monday and then also did some hard back offs after that, then the chance of them coming back on Wednesday to do their primary deadlifts and perform them well is like toasted because they're just going to be fucking wrecked. So I'll often be like, okay, single at 9 on squats on Monday, and whatever you did the week before, just drop 20 kgs and just do that as a back offs, for example. Just do something productive, but don't kill yourself. So I actually do something similar, not as a consistent thing, but it's cool that you've kind of given it a name, or it does have a name that I wasn't familiar with. Back end deload or end of block taper. That's a good perspective, I suppose, rather than, like you said, the intro week, the typical intro week, which is what I do. Admittedly, I primarily do intro weeks.
So my thinking with that is like the two main benefits out of this strategy is one, being able to test out the taper strategy at the end of every single block, because then you're able to express the absolute potential of what your top set would be out of that primary day, but also know what we can do going into competition. But the second thing is that I believe that week 1 is a bigger priority to us than what are the week 5 back down sets. Because if we think about what leads you up towards that week 5 top sets, it's everything that comes before that. So week 1 is a very important week because it does come before that. Whereas everything that comes after that, yes, we can get in some really hard and heavy work. And maybe like from that long-term perspective, it will have that carryover in building that strength. But if you're thrashing yourself on that week 5 or week 4, you're going to have to pull back the week 1. And as you lead up towards those end of blocks, the week 1 is always going to come beforehand, not come after.
Yeah, like that's such an interesting thing that you say, because I think a lot of lifters and coaches forget that what leads you to the performance isn't what you did on the day, it's what you did before it. And so it's all the training that you did in the first few weeks of the program that actually get you to that performance. So no, that's great. I want to ask you about, you're talking a lot about like analyzing lifter performance, and if you're running this mini taper so you can see what maximizes their output at the end of the block, and talking about mini peaking and tinkering with secondaries and tertiaries. How do you go about kind of like filtering through the noise of someone's training? Like we said before, these are human beings that have so many other things going on. Let's say someone's supposed to be doing their primaries and it just doesn't go the way that it was expected. The performance is low. But there's like one of the reasons why their primary didn't go well could be that, like you said, their secondary day was overexposed or underexposed. Or it could be a training related thing, but oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it's externals, and the externals are so hard to measure. Like how do you, like there's nutrition, sleep, external stress, incidental activity. So many things are happening at the same time. Fluctuating motivation. The guy was on the way to the training and they're scrolling Reddit and they saw something that they shouldn't have seen, and now they're distracted. They didn't get into their favorite rack. They're wearing they're not wearing their favorite socks. Like, how do you like filter through this? Is it just a case of if you run it enough times, then you'll have like n equals 50 and you'll be able to know, or do you try to make sense of some of those externals every time?
I think if it's very, very clear with some of these externals that may have impacted a lift, like they will say why they feel average on this, and if the external seems like it has enough validity and every other week has gone well, then that's when I would be like, okay, like that makes sense why you felt like shit today. Like your dog just died. Like it's okay. And yeah, I guess that's more so to filter in what kind of information has been given. But if it is always this day that feels like shit, and let's say like the external factor always changes as well. Like, oh, my main squat feels like shit. This time round, it was had a bad sleep. Next time round, oh, maybe didn't walk enough. Like, if that is the underlying thing, then I actually think is more so a programming problem, and they're just more so trying to find reasons as to why they may not have felt good. But the key point is they give me all the details, but I still need to know how the lift felt in terms of their perception of the lift. And that is the key detail of whether I do make that change or not.
When you say perception, you're talking not just about the objective bar speed or RP, but like how it feels to them.
Correct. Like if it
How is
feels
that
really
different to
heavy on their
RP?
back, or if they feel like their legs are not in them, the lift feels unpracticed. These are the sensations that I'm actually tuning into to inform decision making, not actually like, oh, this is a higher RP, this is overshot. I need to know how it actually felt, like the perception of how the lift felt.
See, that's a lot more subjective and it can be harder to measure, right? But I guess
Correct.
that's the job of a coach.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by teaching athletes how to give good responses and feedback is to actually give me the good information of how the lift felt based on perception. Like the pro perception of how a lift felt. Like I'm sure when you go through a lift,
The subjective experience of it.
correct, you can actually like explain, oh, like, man, I felt like my legs weren't really underneath me. I feel like can't really feel my legs, but the bar felt so good on my back. Like experiences like that, that is exactly what helps me inform what to do.
Yeah, like if you watch someone squat 205 for five this week, and then you watch them squat the same weight next week, and you watch the videos and they're the same bar speed. Like you put them in an app and you overlay the videos and the bar speed is the same, and it's the same in terms of like performance. But one week they said felt good, felt explosive, but then the second week they said, felt a bit sluggish. Like sometimes lifters will say things like it moved fast, but it felt sluggish. Like I just didn't feel poppy. They might say something like that, right? You take that as important information, even if the actual output looks the same. It's the same bar speed, same objective measures.
More so that I always want them to give that kind of feedback regarding the sensation of the lift, but the objective measure of whether something is effective or not is based on bar speed. So if bar speed is still great, but they feel like shit, then I'll say, man, one thing that will never lie to you is bar speed, because at the end of the day, like you're still producing the same amount, if not more levels of force against the bar, because that last rep looks so good. Like maybe with this day, it was just one of those days where you just don't feel really locked in, but you still performed really fucking well. And that's actually the thing that matters. It's your
Okay,
performance,
so what it
not how
sounds
you
like
feel.
yeah, so what it sounds like you're saying is that the bar speed is like the most important variable. Like that's like 80% of the story, but you still want to
Performance is
know
the most
the
variable.
subjective
Correct.
experience.
Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. I want to ask you about your little chapter of bodybuilding because you dived into bodybuilding yourself as an athlete and as a competitor, and I want to ask you how that shaped or influenced, if at all, your coaching practice, your perspective of powerlifting coaching. Because, like, what percentage of your roster right now are powerlifters? Are they basically all powerlifters? Yeah, right. So 100% of your clientele are powerlifters.
Apart from Christoph, who
You
is, I guess, mixed.
he's the one hybrid in a different way to the way we use hybrid nowadays. But yeah, you were a powerlifter exclusively, and then you had your little chapter in bodybuilding. Did that influence your training? I mean, sorry, coaching practices, your perspective of powerlifting training, your perspective of hypertrophy as a powerlifter? How does that get expressed in your coaching?
I don't actually think it changed my coaching practice all that much. It showed me that I definitely don't want to be a full blown bodybuilding coach that gets people ready for stage. But what I guess what it showed me more so through my own experiences and also like through the experiences that Christoph has had is moving away from high specificity in powerlifting, particularly when an athlete is feeling a lot of niggles, quite burnt out, and just slamming and pushing really, really high intensity for bodybuilding work. it can be very, very productive for their long-term development. And I guess in terms of their short-term experience of injury or niggles or pain, it can be really productive for that because it still stimulates your muscles in a really productive way to hopefully still have high exertion of force. Like I do think it's important to pick movement selections that do allow you to load it heavy, like a plate loaded chest press machine, a belt squat, hack squat, pendulum. Like
These big compounds are still important if you're a powerlifter doing bodybuilding.
correct, yeah, and like you need to be loading them heavy, and you can come back to powerlifting without really having that much of a dent. Like, for example, Christoph had not squatted a barbell on his back for, I think, a year and a half, and we did his first block back after his bodybuilding show, deliberately changing it back to a bit more powerlifting because after doing a show, you get these post-show blues because you've suffered for so long, and like then everything that you've made sacrifices for, like it has no meaning now, and you're just getting fat. So at least make a bit more purpose behind gaining weight and fueling performance. He hit an all-time best squat PR for volume than what he's ever done at technically a lower weight class because he used to compete as an 83, so he sat at 85. He's 76 now, and he hit that squat PB from one-time frequency squat and only doing hack squats and pendulums beforehand.
In how long, like how long back into barbell squatting did this happen?
5 weeks,
Wow. Whoa.
technically
Okay,
four
that's quick.
weeks, because he
Yeah,
did
right.
it on the fifth week, so 4 weeks of training.
And so do experiences like that shape the way that you approach your powerlifting coaching now? Are you like, do you see stuff like that and think, shit, do I really need to be so specific? Like, can I give lifters a whole, like, I think there's a very interesting interplay here with working with powerlifters and your psychology background. Because if you've got a powerlifter who messages you and their email address is bobthepowerlifter74 at hotmail.com, and they email you and saying, hey, Mr. Powerlifting Coach, I'm a powerlifter. I love powerlifting. I want to be the best powerlifter possible. And you give them a program with no barbell squats, right? Like from an identity point of view, people don't like that. Do you ever get these instances where you feel like, like you had this experience with Christoph where you're like, dude, you don't even need to be doing that much barbell squatting to improve your squats. But you also have to keep clients happy, right? Like they want to do powerlifting training. It's fun. They like doing SPD. They like that. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Like, is
Yeah,
there
yeah,
like this
yeah.
kind of
I definitely get what you're trying to say. I don't
this,
think it is.
like dichotomy, but yeah, balance.
But like the thing with that is, it's not like we live in a world where not doing barbell squats is the best thing to improve your barbell squats. Like it's not like if you only do pendulums and you push all these bodybuilding work really, really hard, you would definitely be better off doing that to improve your one rep max versus actually doing some barbell squatting. I just don't think we live in that kind of world. So therefore, it's more so the lessons of how much productivity we can have from those movements and actually really focusing on building tissue. And that in itself is what helps with improving the top end strength, more so from like a secondary order level. Because if it was like that clear that if we never do a barbell squat and we only do everything else, and that is the absolute like definitively best way, then I'll just explain it as that. Like I'll literally just say, this is literally what will be the best for you. You can choose to do a bit more barbell squatting, but you won't be as good. And in this same conversation, like I've had this same conversation with athletes, but more so talking about not sending it at the end of every single block in the lead up to competition. And I'll literally say, like, I know you really want to push hard, and I know that is something that you find a lot of value in, like you find a lot of joy in. Like people tell me that they love pushing heavy and hard in their training, but if they're in a comp prep, I'll just explain it as such where, well, you can do this, but if that means that it shaves off 5 kilos off your squat in competition, like, would you be cool with that? Because if you are, then let's do it. Let's do it. Like it's your training, but that's a reality of what could happen.
Yeah, like using the Christoph example, what you're saying is like, it's not a truism that this is the best way forward. So you can't just assume that that's the, like, you can't start giving that to people. Like if it was, like if the best way to improve your powerlifting was to go for like a 10K run every morning, then you would tell everyone to do a 10K run.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
what you're
Yeah.
saying is like, you give people what's best for them, or at least what you think, what you deem to be best for them at the time. And if that thing happens to be what they, not what they want to do, then it takes a little bit of conversation and buy-in to kind of get them across the line.
Correct, correct. And it's not like with Christoph, we did that bodybuilding stint with the hope of like, oh yeah, maybe
Yes.
you'll come back stronger than ever. It just happened to be that case because I think my thinking of why it worked so well was because one, he had such a extended period of focus of actually putting on tissue, and with the time of us doing powerlifting, he at that point of before he stopped, he was squatting 3 times a week, but he was notoriously very, very sandbaggy with his accessory work. So I don't think he was actually building much tissue on that front. He probably already maxed out his stats, and that's kind of how I think about training, is like leveling up stats. But he kind of maxed out his technical efficiency and his maybe like neuromuscular adaptation, so that efficiency of how well his neurons fire. Like the only thing that he could have done to build up his strength was to actually put on muscle. But he was getting so beaten up from doing SBD work, he wasn't able to push his accessories hard, nor did he really have that desire to. So we stripped away all that and actually just leveled up the stat where he actually needed to level up. So now that he came back into doing squatting, he had already had a really good squat technique and his neuromuscular efficiency was already quite good. So he just kind of spent a lot of time developing the weakest link of the chain and now being able to re-express that with a higher base.
I want to share I like that story of Christoph, and I want to share a similar story before I ask you maybe one last question before we wrap things up. Do you know the pole vaulter Mondo Duplantis? So he's like considered he's the goat of pole vault, like literally the goat of pole vault. So he broke the pole vault world record, I don't know, for the first time a few years ago. And since then has added 14 centimeters to it, and nobody's broken the previous record. So he's got like all the top pole vault results ever. And just at the World Championships this week, he broke the pole vault world record again. And there's a really good interview of him, because he's been pole vaulting since he was 5, because his dad was an elite pole vaulter.
Not even early enough.
What's that? Yeah, so that hyper specialist. It should have started when he was 3.
Yeah.
But he's got all these cool videos on his YouTube channel, or someone like his dad obviously was collecting all these videos of him doing pole vault when he was 5 and he was 6, and they had a pole vault in the backyard, like going to all these competitions when he was 7 years old, 8 years old. He's 25 now, so he's been pole vaulting for 20 years. And there's a really good interview of him talking about his training right now. And he goes, I don't even do any pole vaulting training. All I do is sprinting. He goes, all I do is like, I just need to get faster. Like if I can run faster down the runway, then I can bend that pole more and then I can jump higher. So it's like I only actually jump once or twice a week, if that. But all my training, I train like a sprinter. I do jumps, I do sprints, I do sled pushes, I do a bit of weightlifting. So it sounds like a similar thing. It's like he's admitting that his skill of pole vault is so maxed out, there's no point doing it anymore. What he actually needs to do is just become more robust of an athlete, like actually just become faster. So it kind of reminds me of what you're talking about with Christoph. It's like the skill's already there. You don't need to improve your skill, dude. You just need to put on muscle mass on your tissue. And that kind of leads me to my next question, or I guess maybe make this our last one. Otherwise, we'll go on forever. Did you have a similar experience when you went back from weightlifting, from bodybuilding to powerlifting? Did you feel like, did your strength come back with equal speed, or did you find it? Did you find that, yeah, your strength was down? Like, what was your personal experience and interpretation of that experience?
My bench came back very, very quickly, but my squat and deadlift have not, even now, still never gotten back to where I was previously. But I think it was more so due to other factors about why my strength never got back there. It wasn't
Why do
more
you
so
think?
yeah, it
Yeah, why do
wasn't
you
more
think?
so due to like not having enough muscle, because I actually thought I always had a lot of quad muscle, if not more. I only, during my bodybuilding prep, I was only doing 2 sets of squats, or not squats, 2 sets of quads a week, because it was such a big strength. And for bodybuilding, it's all about symmetry, so I actually had to bring my leg size down.
Yeah, right. That's true.
Yeah,
Like, you always had huge quads and upper body a little bit slimmer, a little bit like
yeah,
me, I suppose.
yeah, exactly.
And obviously, doing all that bodybuilding upper body training was good for your bench in some way. Interesting, Victor. It's been a great chat. Always a pleasure to speak to you. I appreciate you giving me, an hour and a half of your time. I know you've got some work to do, busy life. But yeah, I appreciate you making the time and sharing with me some of your wisdom and experiences. I think this is going to be a banger. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of knowledge and enjoyment out of this episode. So I appreciate it.
My pleasure, man. Thank you for having me, and cool to see you make a platform for coaches and for people to have nice conversations with you.
Hopefully, mate. Hopefully, thanks a lot. Before we wrap it up, yeah, anywhere that you want people to find you? Do you have your mentorship coming up again? Do you have another round of one of those, or anything else that you want to send people to? I mean, if people have made it this far.
Yeah. So it's just on Instagram, Victor.uplift or upliftperformance.net. I guess in terms of things that I have coming up soon, I am off to Masters Worlds in a
Cool.
couple of weeks. So collected all three starter Pokemon this year, which is pretty cool. Actually, something that I feel really, really stoked about, like having the opportunity to work with athletes across all three walks of, I guess, divisions and attending all
Yeah, age
three
division is
worlds.
awesome. Where
Yeah.
is Masters Worlds?
It's in South Africa, in Cape Town.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Classic. They always put Masters Worlds in South Africa.
yeah, well, I think there's always a worlds in South
Yeah,
Africa.
true.
So yeah, that's something that's coming up in a couple of weeks. With my mentorship program, I don't know whether I will run another large intake next year. Maybe, maybe not. I'll announce if I do, but I actually want to be taking more on board one-on-one coaching mentorship work and actually having that one-on-one coaching instead of doing the big course where I teach a big bunch of people.
Cool. All right. Awesome, man. Like I said, appreciate you making the time for this. So I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.
Cool. Cheers.